Don't sign it. The janitor's voice froze the $5 billion room. You could hear a pen about to scratch paper. Gold fountain, engraved, final signature. Then, don't sign it. The voice didn't belong. It wasn't one of the suited men around the boardroom table. It didn't come from legal, from finance, from the hedge fund rep dialing in from New York. No, it came from the doorway. From a woman in a janitor's uniform, holding a mop, hair pulled back, eyes tired, hands shaking, but voice steady. The room turned like it had been slapped. Security blinked. The CEO, immaculate, legendary, worth 10 figures, froze mid-signature. Someone coughed. Another whispered, "Who let her in?" She stepped forward, not with rage, not with shame, but with a conviction that rattled the glass walls. "I know what this deal really means, and so do you. It's not just numbers, it's people, it's lives." One man laughed under his breath. "What would you know about billion-dollar deals?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "Because I cleaned the room where the real plans were discussed. I heard everything, and I lost someone because of this company. I'm not letting it happen again." The silence? It wasn't awkward. It was haunted. Because suddenly, someone in this building wasn't supposed to know the truth. But she did. And what happened next changed not just the deal, but the man holding the pen. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. If you believe that truth can come from the most unexpected places, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll be sharing stories like this every single week. Let's keep these conversations going. You wouldn't notice me if I walked past you, and that's exactly how I liked it. My name rarely made it past the badge clipped to my uniform. T. Lewis, Facilities. Not Tanya. Not Miss Lewis. Just that lonely letter and the word that told the world I was there to clean up after it. Every morning at 4:45 a.m., my alarm buzzed before the city even stretched. I'd tiptoe past my daughter's bedroom, pausing to brush my fingers against her door, listening to the soft rhythm of her sleep. Mia was 9, bright as a firefly. The kind of child who made spelling bees look easy and turned empty soup cans into wind chimes. She thought I worked in a big, fancy building. And I did. She just didn't know I pushed mop buckets instead of papers. The elevator at Cresswell Capital opened to floors that gleamed like ice. Glass walls, marble tables, and people who carried coffee like it was part of their identity. They barely looked at me, except when their trash bins overflowed, or someone spilled oat milk on polished floors. But I listened. Oh, I listened. You learn a lot when no one sees you. Whispers between assistants. Hushed meetings when they think you're gone. One exec once joked, "Janitors are like wallpaper, always there, never heard." Still, I swept, I scrubbed, I stayed out of the way, until the nights came, and with them, the weight. After work, I picked Mia up from the after-school center. Her hair in crooked braids, her smile is full of stories. We'd walk past bakeries we couldn't afford to step into. Past shiny toy store windows where she'd press her face against the glass, never asking, only dreaming. At home, our heater made clicking noises, the sink dripped, but our hearts stayed warm. We lit candles during blackouts, we danced to old records. I made up bedtime stories where janitors saved the world. She believed them. So I had to, too. One night, Mia asked, "Mommy, when I grow up, can I work in a big building like you?" I smiled. "No, baby. When you grow up, you'll own the building." She giggled. "Even the elevator? Especially the elevator." That's the thing about motherhood. It teaches you how to lie with hope, to carry dreams that aren't yours anymore. I didn't have a college degree, I didn't have savings, but I had ears. And one night, while buffing the floor outside conference room 6B, I heard something I wasn't supposed to. Words not meant for janitors. The numbers were so big, they sounded made up. A deal being made, fast, quiet, and dirty. I didn't know it yet, but that overheard conversation would become the matchstick that set everything on fire. Because I wasn't just a janitor, I was a mother. And mothers? We don't stay silent when our children's futures are at stake. It started like any other late shift. The high-rise floor was dim, lit only by the quiet hum of overhead LEDs. Most execs were gone. Just a few lights glowed inside glass offices where junior associates tried to prove their worth by burning midnight oil. I was on 39th, buffing the floor near the executive suites. Mia had fallen asleep in the staff lounge again, curled up with her stuffed bear. Miss Harlow at security usually let her stay when it was too late to call a sitter. I had headphones in, but no music playing. Just silence. Easier to listen that way. Then I heard them. 2 voices inside conference room 6B. The door was barely cracked. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I paused, mop in hand. "Let the PR team spin it however they want," one man said. "Once it's signed, we're in the clear. The lawsuits won't stick without proof." Another chuckled. "We bury the cleanup fund, cut the safety oversight budget, shift the liabilities overseas. We're not here to play babysitter to these communities." "Especially not them," the first man scoffed. "They'll protest, they'll tweet, and then they'll move on." I froze, because I knew what them meant. They weren't talking about numbers or spreadsheets anymore. They were talking about people like me. Like Mia. Like the black families in neighborhoods where companies like this dumped waste and stripped resources, calling it development. My hands clenched around the mop handle. I had scrubbed the floors of those same neighborhoods, cleaned school bathrooms with broken sinks, watched cousins cough from the air after some factory partnership, moved in and gutted the community. They didn't see us as real. We were line items, damage estimates, collateral costs. The voice continued, low and smug. "This deal secures the merger. $5 billion. Done. And with the backdoor clause, environmental responsibility disappears. We don't answer to those people." Those people. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Not yet. I backed away quietly, ducked into the janitor's closet and wrote down every word I could remember. My hands shook, but my mind was sharp. This wasn't just greed. This was calculated devastation, disguised with paperwork, hidden behind handshakes. And the worst part, the man leading it, the one who'd benefit the most, was CEO Charles Whitmore. The same man who just a week earlier had smiled at me in the elevator and asked how Mia was doing. The man who shook hands with politicians on TV and talked about bridging the opportunity gap. The one whose face was plastered on Forbes as a visionary in clean investment. But I had heard the truth, and now I couldn't unhear it. I walked back to the lounge, sat beside Mia's sleeping frame, and stared at the city lights outside the window. What could I do? I was just a janitor, a black single mom trying to keep her daughter's shoes from falling apart. But silence, that wasn't an option anymore. Because if that deal went through, it would poison more communities. Steal futures, possibly Mia's. So I made a choice that night, not because I thought I'd win, but because someone had to try. And maybe, just maybe, they'd listen. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on the sofa next to Mia, watching her chest rise and fall in the dark. She had no idea what her mother was about to do. No idea that the woman who kissed her forehead each night was about to stand up against a $5 billion machine. I whispered to myself, "You're going to lose your job." Then another voice inside me said, "And if you don't speak, how many more mothers will lose their children?" By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to protest outside. I wasn't going to leak it to the press. No. I was going to say it straight to the man's face. But I had to be strategic. Cresswell Capital was like a fortress. Layers of bureaucracy, PR armor, and egos too tall to touch. But if there was one thing I'd learned from cleaning these halls, it was this. Power listens only when you force it to. So I started preparing. Quietly, carefully. I copied down everything I'd heard. Names, dates, the specific clauses in the contract they planned to bury. I memorized lines from the internal memos I found crumpled in bins. I recorded my own voice going over the details, whispering them like prayers on the bus to work. I knew when the signing would happen. Friday morning. Conference room A, top floor. Glass walls, cameras, suits, applause. I had 3 days. During those days I watched them move like nothing was wrong. Men in tailored suits laughing in elevators, executives praising the historic merger. Charles Whitmore smiling through interviews like he was building a better world. And me? I was invisible again, pushing my cart, scrubbing their footprints. But underneath that uniform, something had changed. I wasn't just cleaning their mess anymore. I was carrying their secrets. On Thursday evening, I visited my mother's grave. Mia stood quietly by the car while I knelt beside the stone. "Mom," I whispered, "you raised me to survive, but I think I'm finally learning how to fight." She had been a nurse, spoke up once about a patient being mistreated, got fired for it, never got another hospital job again, but she never regretted it. And I realized something as I wiped the dust from her name. Silence is how they win. Voice is how we survive. But courage? That's how we change things. On Friday, I didn't wear my usual beat-up sneakers. I wore the flats Mia had gifted me last Christmas. The ones we bought from a thrift store, but she'd wrapped in gold paper like they were Cinderella's glass slippers. I pulled my curls into a bun, slipped my ID badge around my neck, and when I walked into Cresswell Capital that morning, I wasn't walking in as just a janitor. I was walking in as a mother, a witness, and the one woman in that building who knew what the truth sounded like when it echoed through marble and greed. I didn't know if I'd make it past security. I didn't know if anyone would listen, but I knew this. At 9 a.m., that contract would hit the table. And before it did, I would be standing in that room. The security guard at the elevator barely looked up. That's what happens when you wear a janitor's badge. You move through places unnoticed. Even when you're heading to the top floor at 8:57 a.m., I timed it perfectly. The deal signing was scheduled for 9 sharp. The entire boardroom would be assembled. Cresswell executives, lawyers, media reps, even a few city officials who'd been promised community revitalization projects. The conference room was all glass. You could see it from the elevator lobby. Polished wood table, chrome pens lined in perfect order, a tray of chilled champagne waiting near the window, and at the center of it all, Charles Whitmore, the face of the company, the man who said Black voices mattered on his LinkedIn. The man who posed next to murals in underfunded schools he'd never visited again. The same man whose pen was now poised to sign away the health and future of entire neighborhoods like mine. I pushed open the boardroom doors just as he reached for the document. Eyes turned, confusion sparked, and then silence. Someone in the back muttered, "Security?" A man in a gray suit stepped toward me. "Excuse me, this is a closed. Don't sign it." My voice wasn't loud, but it cut. Whitmore blinked. "I'm sorry. Who?" I stepped forward, held my head high. "My name is Tanya Lewis. I clean your offices, your private meeting rooms, and I know exactly what you're signing." Laughter rippled, short, cold. One board member leaned back. "You people shouldn't be here." "You people." There it was, sharp as a knife in the ribs, polite racism dressed in boardroom language. I locked eyes with him, then turned to Charles. I heard the conversation in room 6B, about cutting safety oversight, about dumping responsibility onto communities that look like mine. Black neighborhoods, poor ones, you called them collateral, I call them home. The man in the gray suit tried again. "Miss Lewis, this isn't appropriate. Neither is corporate genocide," I snapped. Gasps. Someone knocked over a glass. Whitmore slowly placed the pen down. I kept going. I wrote down everything I heard. Dates, names, exact phrases. I have it all. "You're bluffing," one lawyer hissed. "This is defamation?" "No. This is a revelation." I turned to the cameras. "Are we filming today? Go ahead. Let them hear what your billion-dollar deal means. Asthma in children, cancer clusters, schools built next to toxic runoff, Black communities robbed of air and future just to meet your quarterly goals." A woman across the table finally whispered, "Oh my God." Charles Whitmore stood slowly, his hands shook. He looked pale, hollow. He didn't deny it, because he knew, he'd known all along. He just didn't expect a janitor, a Black single mom, to be the one holding him accountable. "You have 10 seconds to leave," one executive barked. I didn't move. Instead, I walked to the head of the table. I laid down my handwritten notes in front of Charles, and I looked him in the eye. "You say you build legacies. Let this moment be yours. Either sign it or stop it." And then I waited. Everyone did. You could have heard a pin drop. No one moved. The $5 billion document lay untouched between 2 gold pens. Champagne glasses sat sweating against crystal coasters, untouched. The media team in the corner froze, waiting for cues that never came. The only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling vent and the quiet breath of a woman who wasn't supposed to be in the room. Me. Charles Whitmore's hands hovered above the table. Not signing, not speaking, just processing. And then came the voice. Low, sharp, dismissive. "She's lying," said Brent Hollister, the VP of Corporate Affairs, a man with gray temples and a history of smiling in photo ops with Black kids, right before closing their schools. "She's a janitor," he continued, "a single mother. Probably misunderstood what she heard. People like her don't grasp this level of business." There it was, again, people like her. As if my economic status made me incapable of comprehension. as if my blackness disqualified me from moral clarity. Charles looked at Brent, then back at me. "She shouldn't be here," Brent added. "Let's resume." But no one moved, because the spell had broken. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I saw it then, a flicker in Whitmore's eyes. Guilt, recognition, fear, maybe all three. Because he had heard my daughter's name once. He'd asked about Mia in the elevator, told me she had a bright smile, and now, that same girl would grow up in the fallout of the paper he was about to sign. A young black woman, with lungs full of their profit margins. He cleared his throat. "Miss Lewis, may I ask, why now?" I didn't blink. "Because you shook my hand in the lobby last year. You said, 'People like you keep this place running.'" I smiled. "But what you meant was, 'People like you stay quiet.'" Gasps again. Someone stood to whisper into the ear of an assistant, no doubt checking if this was already trending online. "I stayed quiet when y'all hired fake consultants to write diversity reports. I stayed quiet when you cut the scholarship fund for inner-city interns. But I won't stay quiet while you sell poison wrapped in quarterly earnings." He looked down. Whitmore turned to the contract and slowly lifted the pen. Not to sign, but to draw a diagonal line through the signature page. "No deal," he said. "Not like this." Chaos. Voices erupted. Hollister stood so fast his chair fell back. "Charles, this is madness." Another executive. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," he said, "because for once, someone in this building told the truth, and she did it without a title." He looked at me again. "Miss Lewis, you've made yourself heard." I swallowed hard. "That's not why I did it." "Why then?" I turned toward the cameras, toward the young intern who looked like she'd never seen a janitor speak in a boardroom, toward every assistant, cleaner, cafeteria worker watching this unfold in real time. "For Mia," I said. "For every little black girl who thinks justice is too expensive to afford." The room fell quiet once more. But it wasn't shameful anymore. It changed. People thought I spoke up because of what I heard. But the truth is, I spoke up because of where I lived. Long before I mopped the floors of Cresswell Capital, I grew up 3 miles away from one of their earliest projects. They called it a revitalization zone, said they were bringing jobs, innovation, and economic growth to a neglected area. Funny how neglected always meant black. Our neighborhood had its cracks, sure, but it had soul. We had church potlucks and front porch choirs. Kids rode bikes till sunset, and old ladies handed out peppermint sticks like currency. Then Cresswell came. First came the heavy trucks, then the fenced lots, then the temporary waste zone, right behind our community garden. And then, the coughing started. My little brother, Deshaun, was 8, smart as anything, obsessed with outer space. He used to sleep with a NASA book under his pillow and draw rocket ships in the fog on our kitchen window. Then one day, he started wheezing. Doctors blamed asthma, but none of us had it before. He got worse. The air smelled funny some days, metallic, sour. We held clothes over our mouths while walking to school. By the time Deshaun turned 9, he was on oxygen at night. By 10, he was gone. Heart failure, they said. Complications. We didn't have lawyers, we didn't have options, just loss. Cresswell paid a small settlement to a few families. No admission of wrongdoing, just NDAs and hush money. We never spoke about it again. But I never forgot. Years later, when I applied to be a janitor at their downtown office, I stood in the lobby for 10 minutes, wondering if I could swallow my pride long enough to feed my daughter. Turns out, I could. I scrubbed the floors of the same empire that killed my brother, smiled at the same logos that had once printed lies about negligible impact. And when Charles Whitmore told the press 2 months ago that this new $12 deal was an investment in sustainability, I felt my stomach turn. Because I had seen what his investments did, not just to soil, to families, to lungs, to dreams. That's why I couldn't walk away. When I looked at Mia coughing last winter from seasonal air issues, I didn't just see my daughter. I saw Deshaun. And I couldn't let her grow up in a world where her body was worth less just because she lived in the wrong zip code. That morning in the boardroom when I handed Charles those notes, I wasn't just speaking for janitors. I was speaking for little boys who never made it to middle school. For the women who worked double shifts and still came home to poisoned tap water. For the communities that weren't just erased, they were buried under asphalt and spreadsheet sheets. And when Charles looked me in the eye and said, "You've made yourself heard," I realized something terrifying. He knew. Maybe not the details, but the truth. He knew they were hurting people, and he did it anyway. Because the system doesn't have to hate us out loud. It just has to value profit more than black lives. Charles Whitmore hadn't moved since crossing the signature line off the deal. He just stood there, hands trembling slightly at his sides. Everyone else in the room was still reacting, some outraged, others whispering to lawyers. But him? He was somewhere else entirely. His mind had drifted backward, to a day in 1998. Back when he was 23, fresh out of Wharton, hungry for recognition, and assigned to shadow a mid-level compliance team at one of Cresswell's rural sites, a pilot project near a small black neighborhood just outside Atlanta. He remembered the heat, the way the sun clung to the back of his neck, and the way the community organizers had gathered outside the site gates, holding signs. He didn't remember what the signs said, but he remembered one face, a boy, about 8 or 9, holding a hand-painted cardboard cutout shaped like a rocket. That boy had stared at him, not with anger, but with disappointment. Back then, Charles had laughed about it with his peers over bourbon. "Kid thinks this is NASA," he joked. What he didn't know, or didn't want to know, was that 3 months later, that very site had experienced a chemical leak. It was buried, silenced, no consequences. The project moved forward. Stocks rose, promotions flowed, and now, decades later, a janitor, a black janitor, had stood in front of him and called out the same project, the same damage, the same injustice, full circle. The face she spoke of, her brother, it wasn't just a name to him anymore. It was that boy, the one with the cardboard rocket. He suddenly realized he had been part of it from the start, and he had climbed the ladder by stepping over communities he never once looked back at. Whitmore looked around the boardroom now, at the pale faces, the expensive suits, the digital ticker streaming good press about equity initiatives, and for the first time, it all looked hollow. He remembered the countless diversity campaigns he'd approved, the scholarships with his name attached, the photo ops at underfunded schools. The Black Business Outreach Department had zero actual power. It had all been a performance, optics without accountability. Because not once had he invited someone like Tanya Lewis to the table. Not once had he promoted someone who looked like her into a decision-making role. Not once had he thought she might be watching, listening, remembering. Until now. Her words echoed louder than the corporate anthem that played at every shareholder meeting. For every little black girl who thinks justice is too expensive to afford. It wasn't just a line. It was an indictment. And somehow it hurt more than any lawsuit could. He blinked slowly and whispered, barely audible, "All these years, we were warned." Across the table, his legal team leaned in, still desperate to pivot to regain control of the room. But Charles wasn't thinking about control anymore. He was thinking about legacy, about blood money, about how silence wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. And for the first time in his entire career, Charles Whitmore was ashamed. Charles Whitmore stepped back from the table, every eye in the boardroom locked on him. There had been many turning points in his career, moments where he pivoted, adjusted language, sidestepped consequences with polish and poise. But this wasn't one of those. This wasn't a pivot. This was a reckoning. He looked down at the torn contract, then across the room to where I stood, still in my janitor's uniform, still holding nothing but truth. And then he did something none of them expected. He walked toward me, no PR script, no press assistant whispering damage control, just him. And the weight of everything he'd ignored. He extended his hand, not in apology, not yet, but in acknowledgement. "Tanya," he said quietly, "if you're willing, I want you to speak." To everyone, I blinked. Speak? To the company, the board, our investors, this whole organization. Brent Hollister stood up instantly. "That is not how we handle internal grievances." "Sit down, Brent," Charles said without raising his voice. "You've handled enough." A murmur rose in the room. Half disbelief, half fear, but Whitmore didn't waver. He turned to the room. "What you heard today is real, and we're not sweeping it away, not this time." A younger executive, the only black woman at the table, leaned forward slightly. You could see the flicker in her eyes. Hope? Or just surprise that someone had finally said it out loud? Charles turned back to me. "You'll have full protection, access, and platform if you're willing to tell your story, publicly." I didn't answer right away. I could feel the ghosts of every silence I'd been forced into, every look down the hallway, every "you" people whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. And now they wanted me to stand in the light? "I'm not doing this for your redemption," I said. "I know. I'm not doing this for attention either." He nodded. "Then do it for your brother and your daughter." The cameras were still rolling. The media reps are unsure if they should keep filming. I stepped forward. "Then I'll speak. But not for your brand. Not to make your investors feel good. I'll speak because our communities never get the microphone, only the fallout. And when I speak," I added, "I won't be cleaning up after anyone's mess, not anymore." The boardroom stayed still. One of the assistants, a young Latina intern in the corner, wiped her eyes, quietly, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to feel this moment. Then a voice from the back. I seconded. She should speak. It was the black woman executive. Others stayed silent, some nodded. A few clearly hated every second of it. But something had shifted. Not enough. Not yet. But something. For the first time, I wasn't just the woman with a mop. I was a mirror, and they were all being forced to look. Not everyone was happy, not everyone applauded, but no one dared interrupt. Because the truth, it was already out. And once truth enters a room, there's no going back. It didn't take long for the headlines to roll in. Janitor halts $5 billion deal. Single mom shakes corporate giant. From mop to microphone, Tanya Lewis speaks out. But behind the headlines were murmurs. Quiet ones. Ugly ones. I still cleaned for 3 more days after that boardroom moment, until they placed me on administrative leave for safety. They didn't say whose safety they meant. But I knew. HR sent a thin email. No phone call. No thanks. Brett Hollister, of course, made rounds with a tight smile, telling departments I had misunderstood the scope of the deal, painting me as impulsive, emotional, unqualified. That's how racism survives the light. It steps into the shadows, just long enough to reshape itself. But what they didn't count on, how many people had been watching? That black woman on the board? Her name was Lauren Fielding. She'd been quietly sitting in rooms like that for 10 years, biting her tongue to keep her seat. The morning after the confrontation, she emailed me. "You reminded me who I am. Let's talk." The conversation turned into a strategy meeting. The meeting turned into a statement. The statement turned into a movement. And Cresswell Capital? Under pressure from investors and the public, they were forced to open a third-party investigation. Then came subpoenas, archived emails, internal memos. The truth spilled like oil down marble stairs. It wasn't just one deal, it was years. Years of targeting low-income black communities for high-risk development, shielding executives with legalese and PR gloss. By month's end, Charles Whitmore made his first public address with me standing beside him. No teleprompter, no PR spin. He looked into the cameras and said, "We built our empire on silence. Hers broke it. From now on, this company listens." Some believed him. Many didn't. I didn't care, because I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for accountability. And it came. Brent Hollister was removed. 3 regional directors were fired. $180 million was allocated into a reparative community fund. Not charity, not optics, but direct reinvestment into the neighborhoods they'd once exploited. And me? I didn't go back to pushing the mop bucket. I went back to pushing truth. With Lauren's help, and the support of community leaders across the city, I founded a watchdog initiative, MIA Mothers for Institutional Accountability, named after my daughter, and for every black child whose voice gets buried under concrete plans and budget lines. We review development deals now. We knock on doors before the damage begins. We show up before the ribbon cutting, not after the burial. At night, Mia still asks, "Are you famous now?" I tell her no, I'm just louder than I used to be. She smiles. Good. Loud means they have to listen. She's right, because even when my voice shook, even when they tried to smear me, even when the system closed ranks, I spoke anyway. And somehow that was enough to crack open the door. 6 months later, the mop closet on the 39th floor was turned into a wellness room. Small thing. Easy press. But I still smiled when I heard, because once upon a time I used to cry in that closet. Quietly, in between floors. On lunch breaks I couldn't afford to take, on days when Mia's school called and I didn't have train fare to get there before closing. Now I sit in conference rooms, not clean them. But truth be told, I never wanted to stay in that building. Cresswell wasn't my finish line. It was just the place where I chose to fight back. These days, I speak in schools, community halls, courtrooms, sometimes on podcasts, though I'm still getting used to hearing my voice recorded. People ask me, Tanya, how did you do it? I tell them, I didn't. We did. Because every time I raised my voice, I heard Deshawn behind me. Every time I hesitated, I saw Mia's eyes, waiting to see if her mother would fold like they expected, or stand like no one ever had for her. I didn't do this to become a symbol. Symbols are easy to frame and forget. I did it because one voice, especially a black woman's voice, has the power to shake walls built over centuries of silence. Charles Whitmore eventually stepped down. Said he wanted to make space. I didn't clap, but I nodded. Because the real work isn't stepping down, it's looking in the mirror. And not flinching. Mia's turning 10 this fall. She wants to be an architect, says she wants to build homes that don't leak sadness. I told her, baby, that's the most powerful blueprint I've ever heard. She drew a house with a garden, a library, and a skylight. On the front steps, she drew 2 stick figures, a little girl and a woman holding a microphone. She handed it to me and said, this is you and me, and we're loud forever. I hung it on the fridge, right next to a sticky note that says, don't sign it. The 3 words that changed everything. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told to stay in your place, let this story remind you. Your voice matters. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know where the truth still echoes. Was there a moment where you stood up, even when it was hard? Tell me below. Like this video if you believe no one is too small to stop something too big. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll be sharing more true stories that deserve to be heard. Because justice doesn't trickle down. It rises up. Mop bucket, microphone, and all.